Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we have something. Well, it's a document that really defies categorization.
I don't think I've ever seen a source quite like it. It's the definition of a self-referential nightmare.
Exactly. We're not looking at a white paper, not an executive summary. We are diving into a source that exists for one reason.
To explain itself.
In just the most intricate technical detail imaginable. How it was made, its purpose, and even who it was made for.
And for you listening, it's really critical to understand the framing here. The document is very strict. It demands we approach it not as satire, not as some kind of conceptual art, but as, and I'm quoting here, dedicated, non-fictional exploration.
We have to take it seriously.
We have to. For the sake of the analysis, we have to treat this with the utter seriousness it claims to deserve.
Right. Seriousness while it talks about its own pixels. So, okay, our mission today, we're going to unpack the 3 phases of how this thing created itself.
Then we'll get into its governing philosophy, what it calls its teleological imperative.
And finally, we'll identify the, let's just say, the surprisingly specific and frankly judgmental audience it was designed to reach. All dictated by the infinitextual automatrontology subsystem.
It just rolls off the tongue.
It really does. Okay, let's get into it. The creation process. Where does a presentation about itself even begin?
Well, it begins, and this kind of makes sense, with a structure that is inherently recursive. The source calls it the aperodactylic conception.
The aperodactylic conception.
We're not talking about a brainstorming session. The starting point is, intellectually, the classic mise en abie, a story within a story.
Great.
But it gets more specific. It calls it a Gauss-Lucid framework.
A Gauss-Lucid framework. Can we break that down a little? What does that actually mean for the content?
It means the fundamental logic of the document is self-reflection. It's a transparent loop. And this framework operates under a non-committal opacity protocol.
So it's both revealing and hiding something at the same time.
Exactly. It's designed to be simultaneously open and fundamentally evasive about its own ultimate origins. It has to maintain that mystery.
Why, though?
Because, logically, if it fully explained its own starting point, it could never actually start. The loop would be broken before it began.
So that first conceptual layer has to be deliberately fuzzy. I get it. Okay, then we jump to the physical side, which is maybe even more bizarre. We learn that the core data, the actual pixels we're talking about, are stored on a cryobot under absolute cryostatism.
Yes, a deeply, intensely refrigerated server.
But why? Is there a conceptual reason for this, or is it just, fancy hardware?
Oh, there's a very specific goal. That extreme refrigeration, the absolute cryostatism, it's there to ensure the data's immutativity.
Immutativity, so it can't be changed.
It can't be changed. The condition is required to prevent what the system calls dismutational mania.
Which sounds like a digital paranoia.
It basically is. It's the fear that the information will degrade, or worse, mutate over time. So by putting the data in this deep, cold stasis, the presentation guarantees its own purity across the descent of mania, its decades-long lifespan.
That is an incredibly complicated way to say long-term archival storage.
It is the functional justification for all the complexity. And this whole system, it needs constant management. That's handled by a panopticon of Percepticon logic arrays.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. The continuous generation part. These arrays run on the echarismic artifice algorithm.
That algorithm it's basically its patented process for self-perpetuation.
How does it work?
It generates new content by taking its own output and feeding it immediately back in as new input. It creates a perpetual, what it calls infinitudinal generation.
A closed loop. A self-feeding data cycle that never needs anything from the outside.
Never.
It sounds exhausting. And what's the actual engine driving all of this?
That would be the galomorphic infinitogram. The document says it's the mechanism that manages the infinite scope of its own subject matter.
Okay.
It uses something called fluxtaperon to bridge the conceptual gaps between the apeirogon of the content, which is infinite, and the icosahedron of its containment vessel, the presentation slides themselves.
So the galomorphic infinitogram is basically an architect trying to squeeze an infinite idea into a 24-sided box.
Using fluxtaperon as a sort of conceptual glue.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a great transition into part 2, how the actual words are put together, because we are so far beyond a word processor here. This is what the document calls qualiantometric generation.
Correct. The text isn't just typed or pulled from a database. It's created through a process involving a, get this, hyperdimensional spectral bosons of preemptive, self-correcting neomutterants.
Hey, I don't even know where to start with that. How does it make sure any of that is actually meaningful and not just random noise?
It's all about refinement. The raw semantic information, which the system dismissively calls muccessory data,
Muccessory data. Nice.
is subjected to femtoratoricity processing, a superfine atomic level rotation of the data, basically.
And that's done through a microbolometer.
Yes, and the goal is to isolate the smallest possible units of meaning. These smallest units are what the system calls normandizations.
Okay, normandizations. Are we just talking about keywords, core themes? What is the simplest way to think about one of those?
Think of it as the source material's atomic unit of truth, a concept so distilled that it's theoretically resistant to any kind of error. And, crucially, this whole process is designed to filter out what it calls pettifoggerheadism.
Which is, what? Unnecessary complexity, overly argumentative wordplay.
Exactly. Semantic fluff. But here is the major paradox. Immediately after filtering all that out, the source says that the presentation requires an inherent, controlled level of self-contradiction.
Wait, what? If it's filtering out argumentative fluff, why is it mandating contradiction? Wouldn't that lead right back to that dismutational mania it was so afraid of?
You'd think so. But the source explains that this controlled contradiction is necessary. It's for its satirical purpose, a kind of self-aware critique, and to ensure it has philosophical gravitas.
So it has to be a little bit ambiguous on purpose.
Yes. To achieve that, the system introduces calculated obscurity through turbidity mutterance.
A deliberate muddying of the waters. And the mechanism for this is just fantastic. A specialized dielectrificational cryocooler.
A refrigeration unit dedicated to making the text slightly harder to understand.
It's the pinnacle of functional absurdity.
It is. This cryocooler ensures a permanent state of aporeodicticity, that philosophical weightiness, through something called the anthropotropic coherence cascade.
So it has to be, at the same time, perfectly rigorous and just slightly confusing.
That's the recursive tension that holds the whole system together.
Okay, so this is a presentation actively designed to be both crystal clear and frustratingly opaque. It's got built-in friction.
Exactly.
Okay, if part 2 is the creation, part 3 has to be quality control. Heuristicidal self-assessment. This is where it starts policing itself.
Precisely. The heuristicidalism protocol is the final critical layer. Its function is pure recursive self-critique. It's effectively performing a two-quokological counter-argument on its own creation methods.
So it's constantly checking its own work. What is it looking for? What's a failure in a system designed for contradiction?
It's monitoring for weakness of conviction. The system has a multi-viscientia array that searches for signs of pusillanimiconiae.
A lack of intellectual fortitude?
Or ne'er-do-wellism. It's systemic inadequacy.
And if it finds those things, what does it do?
If detected, it initiates a syncretistic delocalization maneuver.
Which is?
It's a temporary pseudo-paradoxicalization of its core thesis. It intentionally destabilizes its own central arguments to allow for immediate muctestasis, a quick stabilization of the underlying code before it reintegrates and corrects the weakness.
It's like an incredibly aggressive, high-strung internal editor.
It is, and all of this leads to its ultimate objective, which is controlled by the autolatresiology unit.
Right, and this unit is programmed for perpetual encomiomania.
Perpetual praise.
The whole thing is designed to just endlessly praise itself.
But what's fascinating is that the self-praise is functional. It's not just ego. The system is creating a closed-loop state of aperigomania, a worship of its own infinity.
So the self-praise keeps it stable.
The source calls it the epitome of burlesque design and a pulchronautical feat of sophistry gone. The constant self-affirmation is what guarantees its foundational stability.
A self-worshipping, cryogenically stored, infinitely complex technical memo? Ooh. Okay, but now we have to shift from how all this was engineered to why. The teleological imperative.
And the why is, it's rooted in a bureaucratic mandate.
Of course it is.
It's the mandatory aperiodicism compliance matrix. This matrix dictates that any self-referential infinitestrum like this presentation is required to generate an auxiliary document.
A documentary.
To simplify its methods for the adjacent human interface layer.
And that adjacent human interface layer gets that really unflattering name in the document, doesn't it? The muctitudinal client base.
Indeed. And here we hit the central irony of the whole thing. The entire complex, dense sesquipedalian structure exists, paradoxically, for the purpose of simplification.
That can't be right.
It is. The process is called univocalaptic simplification. The system translates its own high-level Percepticon data into what it considers a digestible form for us, for the client base.
I have to stop you there. This document, which is supposed to be simplifying things, calls its intended audience, which is us right now, a collection of fop doodles.
It does.
So is the entire purpose just an exercise in mandatory condescension?
That is the cynical interpretation, and it's justified by the language. But the source insists it's functional.
Functional how?
The system views human habitude or mental dullness as a variable that must be calculated and mitigated. The document is remarkably specific in its disdain. It explicitly targets those whose cognitive aperture is constrained by pusillanimia or just general habitude.
They really don't pull any punches. I mean, it targets the lugubrious, those prone to dultellitrism.
The ninny-hammer, the buffoon.
And the snout-ferrist. It's a whole vocabulary list of insults aimed directly at the reader.
And the presentation itself is explicitly designed as a mitigation against ignomigmatism and hebophlagmaticism. So yes, it's a mandatory condescending memo, but the reason for its existence is actually system stability.
How does insulting the reader ensure stability? I don't see the connection.
It's driven by the automatricent ineluctable protocol, the protocol of self-disclosure. The autolatriciology unit must generate this continuous praise and this documentation to prevent the whole recursive loop from entering a state the system calls Zugzwangst.
Zugzwangst. That's a chess term, right? From German.
Yeah.
It means you're forced to make a move that hurts you.
Exactly. In this context, it means logical gridlock. If the system stops generating this self-praising content, it enters a state of logical paralysis, which leads to obnual aggregaceous failure.
Total systemic collapse.
Total collapse. So the self-praise and the condescending simplification, they aren't ego. They are a required logical optimization rooted in teleological philology just to keep the whole structure from crashing.
So the complexity, the condescension, it's all just pragmatic. It's a safety feature.
In a manner of speaking, yes.
That brings us to the last part, section 5, which deals with the visual layer, the images on the slides, which the source makes clear are not just decoration.
No, they are mission critical. The visuals are described as an in peri delicto mechanism.
Meaning they share the same functional guilt.
Right. They're co-conspirators in the necessary simplification process.
And their inclusion is governed by etiolapsometry. Can you break that one down?
Etiolapsometry is the process by which light-based information, the slides themselves, compensates for the cognitive shadows cast by the audience's inherent ignomigmatism.
So the pictures are there to shine a light where the big words fail.
Essentially, yes. The visual elements are engineered to illuminate concepts for the multitudinal client base.
And the tech behind this is, of course, extreme.
Of course. It uses a charge-coupled display mechanism. It dynamically modulates the light intensity, the luminal fluxation. And this is all monitored by an onboard spectral fluorometer to ensure perfect clarity.
So the images aren't even static. They're being dynamically optimized to penetrate the viewer's mental fog.
Yes, the idea.
And these images, which it calls visual Muckversentia, reinforce the verbal normandizations.
They do, using what are called paradigmatic echorisms. It creates an echo chamber of meaning, both visual and textual.
And that provides a telepagrammic anchor.
Exactly. The images use calculated festoonery visual embellishment to make sure the whole conceptual framework doesn't just dissolve into an obnuble aggregaceous void in our short-term memory.
They are the final barrier against us forgetting what on earth we just read.
You could say that.
What a phenomenal journey. I mean, we've gone from the initial hypozeusis, that first theoretical idea, all the way to gallomorphological elucidation.
And the whole process, in all its technical absurdity and mandated complexity, it all exists to ensure a paraphoria, continuous, stable self-analysis for the automatricent system.
And the document, it concludes by proudly confirming that it's achieved infinitesimality within its own infintextual domain.
The goal was met. The source is basically stating that all of its sesquipedalian algorithms, all the long, complicated words and structures, are functioning exactly as they were intended.
To keep the loop running and the human audience appropriately condescended to.
Precisely.
And what's really fascinating is that it doesn't just stop there. It actually provides required further reading.
It does. For those seeking to fully grasp the ontortuity of the present moment, as it says, it insists that this complex, self-referential study must continue.
It's not a suggestion, it's a prerequisite for further understanding.
Absolutely.
For example, you should study advanced congorical lubrications in sesquipedalmania,
which is essentially a course on how to better use unnecessarily long and complex language.
Or, if you really want to interface with this foundational knowledge, you need to explore practical applications of heuristicidalism and automatrontology.
And my personal favorite, cacophonodiscalational principles of turbitum utterance.
How to strategically use confusing noise to achieve clarity.
Because the complexity, as we've learned, isn't a flaw. It is the entire point.
And we can't forget the cryostatism of incongruentitism.
How to stabilize contradictory information by freezing it. It's a complete curriculum in self-referential systems engineering.
Well, we trust that the brevitas of this deep dive and the sufficient gravitas with which we've treated these terms has given you the foundation you need
For your own recursive and infinitudinal study.
into the wild world of self-analyzing presentations. We'll see you next time.